kind of walk by. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the mock BOF. I think we'll get started in just a minute, so find your seats.
Okay, folks, let's get started. For those of you who haven't seen Gritty before, the delightful figure in front of you is the mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers and a beloved figure there in Philadelphia. I regret that I'm not able to join you myself. Unfortunately, I managed to blow out my back right before getting on the plane, and the combination didn't seem like a good one. So you are ably represented in the room by my colleague, Alan. Alan, say hi.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Alan will be handling all of the in-room queue management, etc., and we'll be trying to drive the slides and this together. First and foremost, note well. Something not on the note well, but we've been asked to emphasize for those of you in the room is that it is very important to keep your masks on. If you need to actively eat or drink, please step into the hall and do that. But while you're in the room, please leave your mask on unless you're actively speaking at one of the mics. And I think you'll find that the mics are sensitive enough that you'll be able to be heard just fine if you choose to leave them on even there. The note well that you see.
Let me just jump in real quick, Ted, and say I think I see a few folks maybe not wearing masks. So just double check if you can touch your face and there's not a mask there. Try to fix that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Somebody noted in the chat that it appears they're getting a little bit of distortion from my mic. I've moved it a little bit further away. Hopefully that helps. This is the note well. Since we're Wednesday of the week, you've probably seen it before, but just as a reminder, please note that you are responsible for maintaining your conduct according to each of the BCPs you see listed below. This is our agenda. First, I want to say thank you to Hunter and to Lucas. Hunter will be taking notes locally and uploading them later, and Luca is doing a backup there. So we do have scribes. We very much appreciate that. The second thing to remind you is that because this is a BOF, there will be a set of BOF questions. You'll see a preview in just a moment. That means that we will be using the question tool that's part of the system, the show of hands tool. If you're on the desktop system, it's between the bell and the file folder. It looks like a little chart. So please make sure that if you're in the room, that you're also logged into one of the Meet Echo systems so that you're able to participate in those questions. I think this is a pretty standard agenda for a BOF in that we're going to go through the charter. We'll then have discussion and then go through the BOF questions, and time permitting, and if it still seems appropriate, there's a technical presentation which was volunteered. Are there any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, here is the preview of the BOF questions. So these are the questions that we'll be asking the community after we've gone through the charter. So each of you, please, as you're considering the charter or changes you'd like to see in it or discussion about it, make sure that you keep in mind these questions. Does the community think that the problem statement is clear, well-scoped, solvable, and useful? We will then ask for folks willing to review the document or comment on the mailing list if a working group is formed. We'll then ask if a working group should be formed. and then we'll ask anybody who doesn't think it should be formed if they want to address the BOF to express their concerns. So those are the questions that you should have in mind as we go through the charter. The charter has been broken up into different sections to go with the presentation style of PDF. For those of you who prefer to see it in a single sheet, there's also a version in the meeting materials in that format if you prefer it. So the first part of the charter reads, Media Over Quick will develop a simple, low-latency media delivery solution for ingest and distribution. This solution may address use cases including live streaming, gaming, and media conferencing, and will scale efficiently. The solution will support both web browsers and non-browser endpoints. The work focuses on building protocol mechanisms for publication of media and means to identify and receive the media. The media publication protocol will be a push protocol for sending media including audio, video, and timed metadata, such as closed captions and cue points. The common protocol for publishing media over ingest and distribution will support one or more media formats, an interoperable way to request media and encodings, rate adaptation strategies based on changing codec rates, changing chosen media encoding qualities, cache-friendly media mechanisms. The media to name and receive media will enable requesting the server start sending media related to a given point in the stream, selection of desired encoding, choosing language, bitrate, etc. Media will be mapped onto underlying quick mechanisms, quick streams, and/or quick datagrams, and can be used over raw quick or web transport. The proposed solution will provide extensibility for supporting different media formats and shall specify a mandatory to implement media format to ensure interoperability. Support for multiple media types and media encodings shall be proposed. The solution will specify a simple method of authentication to access media, as well as a mechanism for carrying information enabling additional decryption of media payloads where required. The working group will define MOQ such that the media publication protocol can leverage coordinating relays, caches, or replication points wherever applicable to improve the delivery performance. Media will be encrypted, possibly end-to-end encrypted for certain use cases. The keying mechanisms for media confidentiality is, however, outside the scope of this working group. Even when media is end-to-end encrypted, the relays can access metadata needed for caching, such as timestamps, making media forwarding decisions such as drop or delay under congestion, and so on. This working group will not propose changes to the underlying quick transport, but may propose requirements for quick extensions to the quick working group. This working group will not define signaling mechanisms for discovery of relay or media producers or consumers. This working group will coordinate with the quick and web transport working groups as needed. It will liaise with MPEG-Dash Industry Forum and the W3C Web Transport as appropriate. Here are the milestones currently proposed. Working group adoption of protocol specification for common media publication protocol over quick. Working group adoption of protocol specification for datagram extension to media publication protocol over quick. Working group adoption of protocol specification for media subscription protocol over quick. Working group adoption of architecture specification for common media delivery protocol over quick. Working group adoption of use cases and requirements document for media delivery over quick. And a decision about whether to forward to ISG for publication to be made later by working group consensus, each of which then results in one being forwarded to the ISG. So that is a quick run through the charter. You should also all have the access to it in the meeting materials if you wish to refer to it directly. The queues are open for discussion. Please remember to use the Meet Echo queue to make sure that we have that correctly.
All right, first up is Sanjay.
Hi, this is Sanjay Mishra. Ted, if you can go back to your opening description of the charter. So the second sentence here says, this solution may address use cases. My question is that shouldn't we be a little bit more clear about it, that the intent is to define use cases? So should we say shall or something more persistent that we do plan to do something here than just saying may?
So there's a little bit of discussion on the list, and the reason that it's worded this way at the moment is because it may address use cases including. And so the including there may also be use cases which are not included, so it's not more definite than that. So if we want to make it more definite, we could update this to say, may address use cases which shall include at least, and then include these, and then leave open what else is included. Would you prefer that wording?
Sorry, I had walked away from the mic. Yes, I think that makes sense to me.
Okay, can I ask you to open a PR, or would you like one of us to do it?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Victor?
Victor Vasily of Google. So one thing I just realized is on the second slide in the charter, we say for push protocol a way to request media, but request is fundamentally not a push operation, it's kind of a pull operation. So we might want to be more vague about what specifically we want the push protocol to do in terms of media format negotiation. Because as it stands right now, it makes it sound like, huh? Even close. Oh, okay.
Remember that crosstalk
Okay.
is not audible to the hybrid user, so please repeat anything that's said directly there.
Okay, is this better? So the regarding on the second slide, there is the part where we say request encode media formats and encoding, but request is a pull operation, which is probably more complicated than something we want in a baseline push protocol, because often for push cases, I just have one format and I want to peer know what this format is, but I might not necessarily want to request or negotiate it. So I think we need to make the wording there more generic and lower the requirements for the push protocol, and or move parts of it to the mechanism to name and receive media.
So it sounds like push is making some implications for you. And I guess as the other folks come to the mic line, please consider whether there's a different phrase than push that captures what you believe the protocol is likely to do. Because I do agree that there are some aspects of what's described here that are not purely push protocol, but I think are intended to, cause a push to begin, so to speak, and we may need a different phrase for that.
Can I clarify? Sorry, I don't have objection to push. I think push is very good. It's more the connotation to request that worry me.
Okay, thanks. Julius?
Hello. I think the intent here is to allow also to negotiate parameters such as SVC or simulcast. But I'm wondering whether we should be explicit about it. I mean, is the charter currently written in such a way that people in the future might claim that negotiating the simulcast structure or negotiating SVC is out of scope? If people think that it is clear enough, then I'm fine with that. but I'm wondering whether that should be made explicit.
Is that a question for someone in particular or to the room?
No, it is a comment about the current charter.
Okay.
Saying
Thanks.
that I'm a little bit worried whether this is too restrictive or not.
Okay. Colin.
Colin Jennings, Cisco. I think when we talk about the push, like one of the use cases, like on the ingest, you might only have one thing to push, but on the distribution sort of approach, like one of our key use cases is be able to request bit streams at different, bit rates effectively at some level, right? That's a key fundamental part of this stuff. So I think the fact that though it is a push protocol does not mean there's no information flowing in the opposite direction, telling something what to push. So I think we just need to phrase this in a way of, there's some information, you could say what you want pushed in some sort of way, right? And we've sort of described in the outline here. So I don't think people can take push protocol to mean that information only goes one direction. It's not. Like our congestion, our security, nothing would work with that. There's a certain information you can indicate about what's being pushed to you. And sometimes there's only one thing to push, that's fine. But other times there might be a little bit of information that's like even the sort of correlating URI name of what many streams a server might support that it needs to push to you. Thanks. So I think the text in the charter is pretty good right now. I just think that we need to understand it to mean it in that context.
Kyle?
Kyle Rose, Akamai. Is this thing on? So I note that the charter says, or so far the draft charter says, the solution may address use cases including live streaming, gaming, and media conferencing. These are very different use cases. It really feels like, so for instance, gaming is something that wants to be low latency in one direction but doesn't require interactivity. Media conferencing requires interactivity, low latency interactivity in both directions. Live streaming can have an arbitrarily high hand wave latency depending on what is acceptable to both customers and viewers and content providers. It seems like one of the reasons why the Quick Working Group was successful is they picked a particular use case, which was HTTP, and implemented that. And that seems like a better approach, is like pick a single use case and have other people in the room with future use cases that will basically say, okay, let's make sure that whatever we do here doesn't preclude these future use cases, but just kind of scale it back a little bit rather than trying to boil the ocean. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Luke?
Hi. Going back to push versus pull really quickly. I don't think the charter needs to specify push. I think it's, if anything, it's a technical detail. We're trying to reduce latency and we're trying to make it simpler. But end of the day, the media endpoints need to coordinate. You could feasibly have, the other end request. And I think that there's a whole lot of room there. And there's going to be debate in the future if you say push protocol. Like, is this technically a push protocol? But I said I want something. So I would just remove that from the charter, remove push versus pull. Just, it's a protocol for sending media. It doesn't matter who asks for the data.
Thanks. Victor?
Hello, I have one clarification question. So I am Emil from Orange.
Oh, just next time, please remember to.
Do you hear me?
Yes, but just next time, remember to join the queue.
Okay. Can you show the second slide? Yeah. My name is Emil. I work for Orange. And you say the common protocol for publishing over ingest and distribution. Does it mean that it will be the same protocol for ingesting the content and for distributing the content?
I think that's the intention, yes.
It's a requirement. Okay, good.
Thanks. Victor?
Hello again. So to elaborate on push versus pull, I think the fundamental distinction I'm trying to make here is that there is a part of the protocol that's responsible for getting media from one point to another, and like specifying how it's actually transferred, and then there is all of the negotiation and side channel. And to some extent, the reason we're trying to kind of draw the line between different drafts is that the part where you send media and the exact method approach, it should be common, regardless of what you're doing, but depending on your specific use case, the actual things you will negotiate, etc., will be different. So for instance, requesting media makes sense in case you're okay, so sorry, but the point I'm trying to make is the part we're trying to I want to separate is the part where the media gets transferred versus any control information.
Thanks. Mo?
Mo Zanatti, Cisco. I think I agree with Luke that the push versus pull is probably, not something that needs to be fleshed out in the charter. It's I don't think it's just a nuance. I think it is going to be a lot more technical detail, and I think people have different ideas in the room. Like what Victor calls push, I don't think some others would call push. I think it's correct to have the text about receivers requesting in the charter. I think that makes sense. I don't think we should have something that says, publishers push. I think that goes too far, and we need to work the details of what does it actually mean to publish. Is it a request from the server to tell you to go ahead, you can start publishing? And do we want a symmetric protocol where it's the same whether you're publishing or subscribing? It's a request and a response, and the response can be not immediate or synchronous, but long-lived. It could send objects over seconds in response to that request. I think those details need to be fleshed out in documents and not in the charter. And one final point on what Julius mentioned for SVC and various encodings. I think the current text already captures the rated adaptation strategies with different codec rates, and qualities and encodings. I think that already captures all that we want for the different media formats that people are interested in.
Thank you. Bernard.
Yeah, I support Kyle's comment that this is boiling the ocean. The use cases that are described are extremely different. And I think my personal view is that the focus here should be on live streaming, which in particular, needs the low latency, but also can benefit from caching. And some of the gaming use cases are extremely different. They don't use caching. And conferencing is another whole problem of real-time conferencing. So I think it needs more focus. There's enough work in here for like 3 or 4 working groups.
Thank you. Stefan?
So 2 things. First, I support what Kyle and Bernard said. I've said that before. The second thing is I'm worried about specifying a mandatory media format. Given the current political climate, I mean, realistically, the choice nowadays is between the VP9 AV1 world and the HEVC VVC world for the video stuff. That's scary right now, as those of us who listen in what's going on in DVB and W3C and places like that have already experienced. Yeah. Entirely too many lawyers involved. I would suggest to remove this. I know that interoperability is a high goal, blah, 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 but I would not go. It's way too painful. Thank you.
Who's next? Suhas.
Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you. Speak up just a bit.
Okay, cool. I kind of wanted to touch a bit upon the use cases and should we cover all these named use cases or not? So one of the main trends I see why mock was formed, even when we had something like a Dash or HLS, was on WebRTC on one side, was that some of the use cases that we are seeing, there's a trend where use cases that involve streaming and also data interactivity, they're combining. And we don't have a solution to support anything like that today. Either one is very complicated or other is very latency driven and cannot meet the interactivity requirements. And that's true for both streaming.
Can you slow down just a little bit? I'm having a hard time getting your words.
Okay, so I'll try it second take on. So the point I was trying to say is that there's a lot of new use cases that's coming where the streaming world is trying to move towards bringing in interactivity aspects, and the interactive world is trying to bring into the scaling aspects, and that's driving the mock work. That's what where I felt that the today's solutions, either the WebRTC being complex on one side, or the existing low latency dash or the other streaming solutions, they are not able to meet the interactivity requirements. And most of the use cases that have been written there, they have a common theme of having low latency and interactivity and scale in common in there. Does all these use cases need caching? May not, but most of them do need do benefit from having caching. So even though I do feel like it might be boiling the ocean, but they are only, these things need to be solved for today's and tomorrow's use cases, and hence a new working group and mock, I think, would be a good place for that. And on the push versus pull, it might be technical at this point in time, but I tend to agree with what Victor was pointing out, saying that regardless of how the media is asked, how the media is delivered should be common across both ingest and distribution side. If you want to use the word push or pull or a different terminology, that's totally fine, but we need to capture that aspect somewhere in the chapter. Thank you.
Okay, so Alan and I have discussed this a little bit in a side channel, and it seems like the discussion of whether the phrase push should be there is kind of rat-holing a little bit. And so I think what we'd like to say as chairs is that we accept that this is a design decision to be made by the working group, and that the exact phrasing to describe the protocol could be filigreed or something very different than push, but we're going to set that aside, functionally accept the PR that was just filed to remove the push from the charter, and move on to the more substantive discussions, because that seems to be a bit of a rat hole. It doesn't seem to be a bit of a rat hole to talk about how many use cases we're going to support. And so I think one of the things in the current charter is an attempt to identify the high value ones that are currently kind of active in the industry at the moment, but leave the will support there to be a little bit vaguer than that. And so I think it would be very useful if folks could focus on whether picking one of these wouldn't have bad long-term consequences, because I think in the chat it's been raised by a couple of people that it might be restrictive, and then picking two might be better than one, picking three might be better than two. So I think some additional discussion on that is probably needed.
All right, thanks. Let's see, Sanjay.
Hi, this is Sanjay Mishra from Verizon. I also have questions. As I was reading the charter, I also struggled with the use cases that are so divergent in nature, each of those. So I think I agree that it makes sense to have a charter that basically scopes out all the relevant work that needs to be done. But I think it might be helpful once, if the working group is formed, that some discussion happens that sort of says, you know, what is the priority? Can we take a live streaming use case as a first example of that working group will take on, or versus, you know, a media conferencing or live streaming or live gaming, because each of these are very different use cases and have their own different requirements in terms of what the latency really means and so forth. So I think it's probably worth looking at it that there's some prioritization made, and working group as a whole decides that this is the use case we want to work, unless there are enough people that will work independently on each of these use cases, you know, which is really, really very wide. So I think it may be better to have one focus and then get that out of the way and then take the next use case and so on. Thanks.
Thank you. Jorg.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to second the point that Stefan made. Personally, I don't care too much about...
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Personally, I wanted to second the point that Stefan made. Personally, I don't care too much about media encoding, but it seems to be hard to pick, to agree on a single one. We had issues with that before. And especially given the zoo of use cases that we currently have, it may not be even possible to pick something sensible that would make it across all these cases beyond the political stuff that Stefan pointed out.
Thanks. Spencer.
Okay, Spencer Dawkins. I've got two things, but let me just focus on the one we're talking about for now. The discussion about the use cases, I agree with, but I wanted to go a little bit further on that. One of the questions I've asked on the mailing list was about how we would, whether there's a relationship between this and work in AVT core. And the answer on the mailing list was there's not a relationship with AVT core. Especially if we're getting down to the interactive use cases. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I mean, I'm just mostly asking if other people are buying that. But that has a lot to, like I say, it has a lot to do with the use cases that are in scope. If the use cases that are in scope are live media use cases, I think it is clear that there's not a relationship or not a close relationship. But I think that if Mach is also targeting interactive use cases, it's a lot harder to say that there's not one. There's people in line behind me, so I will stop there.
You're saying, no, say more. Say what you want change. What should we change in the charter? Make a suggestion. You haven't said anything yet.
I'm informed by Cullen behind me that I have not said anything yet, so I will take a shot at saying something, which is basically the definition of the so like I say, the definition of the use cases can or could point to live media as defined in the Mach requirements draft, which is an individual draft and has no standing. But I'm saying it does have a definition for that in there that could be used to distinguish the use cases that are in scope. And that I'm not telling you that's the right answer. I'm telling you that that would be a concrete suggestion.
That makes sense. Thank you. That was concrete. Thanks, Spencer. So, Cullen Jennings. I sort of want to address this use case thing. I think that the people that have been working on this for the past, couple years and 6 months and having lots of conversations on this, we sort of tried to think about, do we just want, the way we split up the different ways of splitting apart the work we're going to do. Do we just do ingress, or do we just do distribution, or do we do both? And then the thing is, there's huge efficiency gains of what you want to do. And so you can look at that list of things and go, oh, wow, that's a wide list of use cases. They're very different. But what we do at IETF is try and create a single generic tool that's pretty simple. And I'll talk about what the tool is that this is creating here that covers multiple things. I mean, HTTP, you can use it for banking websites. You can use it for news websites. You can use it for gaming. I mean, you can even send, machine calls over it. It's a generic tool. So the tool that we're trying to create here is a low latency, highly scalable video system. And we do both ingress and distribution, because if you don't do both, you end up with mapping problems between the two. So that's the real incentive there. And we're not talking about creating different tools for all of those use cases. We're talking about creating one tool that sort of will meet to varying degrees each one of those use cases. And that tool is a low latency, highly scalable, simple sort of video up and down system. And I don't think there's, if you say, oh, we're only going to deal with, one of those use cases, you end up with there's already better solutions in the marketplace for it. You could use WebRTC. You could go use HLS Dash. The thing is, when you want to combine these things together and have a unified tool and way of doing it, that's when you get to this work making sense. So I don't really care if people remove some of those use cases or whatever. That's not, we can remove all the use cases and mention of them from the charter. But the important thing to me is that the tool we're creating is going to end up being useful for all of those use cases, no matter what we say in this, right? Like that's the tool we want to create here. So it's really important to me that we keep the scope of the work in the charter, as it is, that we don't just try and greatly scope it down, because it has no value if you take a smaller piece in this and the people doing the work just aren't going to be willing to work on it. It's not a huge value thing. And we need it to be common. We need it to meet a bunch of these use cases so that we can get the synergy of the different groups of people that all need to work on this to bring something together. So I think it really needs to proceed as it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Kirill.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I came to say almost the same thing that Colin said. So in terms of use cases, I think if we go with just like a live streaming use case, right? So it's very easy to, there's already like Dash HLS, all these different solutions that sort of works, right? So, but I think it's important to build a solution that works for different use cases. And we already see the requirements even within live streaming. There are use cases where latency of 10 seconds is fine, but there are requirements where latency of sub-second is needed for interactivity, right? So, and like, where do you draw the line where it's like, yeah, like at this latency, you need a different protocol. And it's also very difficult to build, deploy, and run the services if for every single, like for very similar use cases, you have to essentially use different protocols and different infrastructure. So having something that works for variety of cases would be very, very beneficial. And I understand there's definitely, it's a hard problem. Hopefully we can at least try to solve it. The second point I want to, like, related to charter phrasing, I think in the beginning of the charter, there is a phrase about interoperable way to request median encodings. I have slight problem with wording request because I think it sort of implies that someone is asked, like that someone has to ask about the quality, the encodings that being sent. But I think it's important to support the cases where, like, for example, whoever is sending media can decide what the quality to send. So, like, basically what I'm talking about, the server-driven decisions versus client-driven decisions, and we need to support both. Thank you.
Thanks. Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan Rosenberg, 5'9". 2 comments. First, wanted to respond to Stefan Wenger and disagree. I do think we should make sure we produce something that has a minimum mandatory codecs. I think we are at the point now on the internet where we can do that, largely due to the very painful work that happened before that many of us went through, Opus and AV1 being the result. So that's comment number 1. Comment number 2 on the wording on the charter. One thought or possible suggestion is to think of this as a publish-subscribe system, because where the publishing effectively takes care of the push and subscribe is on the receive side. I think if you frame it as publish-subscribe, a lot of the problems that we need to address with the protocol become very clear. Naming and identification, how you create and establish subscriptions, how you choose amongst formats, all the things, buffering and retransmission, caching from the publisher to the subscriber, all become fairly clear and understood concepts. So I apologize, I did read the docs, but have not followed the list so recently, so that may have been discussed, but that's one suggestion.
Thanks. Philip.
Philhan Baker. Yeah, a couple of charter tweaks. Could you go to slide number 3? Well, the charter 3. Where it says, shall specify mandatory to implement media format, I'd like to make that a may. And the reason for that is interoperability is a property of systems. And when I build systems, I really do not care what the mandatory to implement of Jose or PKCS7 or whatever I might be using is. When I build the system, that's the point at which I'm going to choose my mandatory to implement algorithms. And unless you've got a key exchange, you're not going to have interop anyway. So I don't want to have that argument here, but I'd like to defer it so that working group can have it. So if we make that a may, so that's the first tweak I'd like to make. And then when we go to the, where it mentions end-to-end encryption, I don't know which slide that's on, I'm afraid. I'd like to make that ends, plural, to ends. And I know that we're very big on end-to-end. That doesn't work in security because it's not just Alice and Bob. And there's mention of these relay servers getting unencrypted metadata. I want to be able to encrypt it. And I want to have that in the first version of the spec rather than coming back for a BIS or a new charter group just to be able to encrypt the metadata which should have been encrypted all along. So I'd like the charter to recognize that there's a plurality of ends and the encryption mechanism should allow for that.
Thanks, Luke.
Hi, Luke from Twitch. So the first thing is media formats is a little vague, at least in the media world. I don't know if it's referring to a container or a codec. Definitely there should be a mandatory container, but mandatory codec is kind of a deal breaker for distribution at least, because a lot of the times we don't have control over what it was encoded. And you end up just having lock-in, you know, you just force this one old codec to be used till the end of the day, end of days. The second thing is for use cases, real-time's hard, and WebRTC does a good job these days. It's complicated, but also trying to tackle real-time ourselves is complicated. It might even be a bit of a scope creep. The real use case, at least we see, is interactive use cases where real-time, like conversational latency isn't required, but you have the ability to buffer more if needed on a viewer-by-viewer basis. So it's really hard to talk about this and put it in the charter, but I would focus more just on like interactive is the word. I think gaming and conferencing is kind of difficult, honestly. But we definitely want to avoid the current situation where you have to pick a protocol per latency budget. It's awful that one viewer has to get WebRTC because they need real time, and then somebody else needs to get HLS because they have a poor network. So that's the big thing I think that we want to solve, is trying spread out the use cases, and unfortunately that means tackling more areas.
Okay, thank you. Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Daigle, and for the purposes of this, I'll just observe that I'm the co-chair of the MOPS working group. I don't have an issue with the text of the charter per se, insofar as I think it does accurately and concretely describe the work that people who have been working on this for a year would like to do, and I suspect that that work can be achieved. However, I'm a little worried, particularly when Colin says we build general protocols for a multiplicity of use cases and purposes, that the people who have been working on it for the last year aren't really the whole of the universe of people who are delivering video over IP. I think there are some pretty significant audiences not represented in the room, and that's okay, as long as you understand that, and as long as we don't, in a year's time or 2 years' time, say, well, now we have the ultimate media transport over QUIC, and anybody who wants to do any delivery over IP, any video delivery over IP, have to use this protocol, even if it wasn't designed for your use cases. The first few lines of the charter of the MOPS working group: internet-wide and within domain IP delivered media is widespread, leading to significant technology developments across industries not traditionally thought of as internet technology developers or operators, as well as considerable quantities of traffic on local and transit networks. So we spent a couple of years trying to attract some of those audiences into the IETF. And I think that what we really need here is to make sure that MOC doesn't continue forward ignorant of the existence of MOPS and doing unlinked work. So we're MOPS, we're here to help.
let me just maybe pause and ask. I see there are a lot of people in this room and online, but I don't know who shows up to MOPS. So do you feel like there at least the MOPS people are here? Are you here?
There are certainly some MOPS people here, and that's a good thing, TM. However, again, damn commas. However, we're actually trying to draw more people from the SVA, CTA, other organizations into the IETF in general. So, we can help be a conduit, if you will, but just don't suffer from the closed world assumption and think that everything that all necessary opinions have been represented.
Thanks.
Leslie, could you add a PR to add MOP to the list of the working group we'll coordinate with?
I see a thumbs up, I think.
Okay.
Okay, Magnus.
Yeah, Magnus Westlund Eriksson. I want to talk about the media format. I've probably partly to blame for some of this formulation because I think I fostered a view in some discussions with the proponents here at the last meeting. And my intention was really, from my perspective, it is we're talking about ISO-based media files, CMAS, or things like that, or potentially are you using RTP payloads in general with some metadata around this to make it work? But I kind of see that probably should soften the wording here because it does depend on the usage, where you deploy it, etc. And there are a few different cases here which might have different choices on how they want to use it. But it's definitely, the general aspect of you need to take the media formats into account in this work is clear. And I think it's crucial to ensure that multiple can be supported.
Okay, thanks. Ecker.
A few points. I agree with Luke that it's important to specify whether this is really for, this is for video conferencing type applications or for streaming applications. They are different. And I understand JDR's point that they kind of shade in each other, but they're different. So knowing what we're targeting is important. I went through the text on this about encryption and I find it extraordinarily puzzling. So first of all, Quick is always encrypted, and Quick has its own keying exchange. And so I don't understand what any of this text really means. It appears to be something about an end encryption on top of Quick, but it needs some major revisions to actually say something that like people can understand. I also don't understand really what a simple method of authentication to access media is, or for enabling additional decryption. So perhaps someone can fix that stuff, but I think the charter needs to be, and maybe it's all, and I'm not saying that structurally what he's being proposed to do is fine because I don't understand it, but I'm saying that I do not understand it. That's problematic. And finally, please do not write ends to ends. Nobody knows what that means.
Okay, thanks. Omer.
Hello, Omer Shapiro, now Apple. I'm a little bit confused with the being cache friendly and also working on a raw, quick or web transport, because it occurs to me that large-scale caching implies the use of HTTP. So what I'm trying to say is that this charter seems like a superset of a few things that may not necessarily work all the time together. And maybe it's worth clarifying the intention. Is this the case of working group that will oversee several solutions that will not work together? Or is the intent to actually try to make it possible to cache real quick? So this is my comment. It's a comment for clarification. It's not a technical comment of, hey, this needs to be done, just for clarification of intent.
Okay, I think if you asked, is the intention to cache raw quick, I don't think that's necessarily the goal, but maybe somebody who's closer to caching or has thought about the text about relays and caches and cache friendliness can talk about maybe what that means a little bit more and how it relates to HTTP. Colin.
Colin Jace, let me just speak to both the previous two speakers' questions there and see if I can answer them. So I'm going to start with the security stuff. Ecker, point well taken, that needs to be clarified in here, but I think that the proponents of this BOF have a fairly clear understanding of what we mean, and let me try and explain what that is, and then we can try and work to get the charter to reflect that. Certainly, to put this in HTTP terms, yes, all the connections are fully quick, normal interpreted to the, like, just like HTTP is encrypted to the CDN, it's exactly the same. But we want to have optionally the ability to, inside of what's being so that's hop by hop encryption between the client and the CDN, or the client and the server if there is no CDN, and then from the server back down to the other receiving client is also, that's all encrypted. So what the end-to-end talking here is about is the data inside of that can also be optionally encrypted. So some things wouldn't do it, but the intention is to use MLS to key it and to be able to encrypt the blocks there. And the metadata, which is always a bad word, there has to be some envelope data that is authenticated but not encrypted that tells you, like, time to live, what the data is, its destination, who it's going to. So I think that that's reasonably, like, maybe, I'm not saying people agree on exactly the details of what the metadata is or anything, but the idea that we would optionally be able to take the media for some of the use cases and end-to-end encrypt it, I think is really critical to some of the use cases. And the way that that might be done might be completely different depending on whether you're talking about distributing, you know, DRM encrypted video or anything else. And it's out of scope of this working group, other than to have a placeholder to be able to do that type of stuff, and an architecture that enabled those types of use cases for the people that wanted it. So I hope that clarifies that one a little bit. On the caching, the intention is not that you could use existing HTTP CDNs, but that there are CDN providers that are aware of this work and have looked at the idea of building something that was compatible with a protocol that came out of this working group that was very media specific and very similar to what they already do with quick HTTP CDNs, to be able to, you know, terminate the quick connection, grab the data in it, cache it, and do whatever was needed by the work that was done out of this. So it's, well, I think when we say cache friendly, I mean, that's a completely vague term. What does that even mean, right? It's hard. But I think what people are imagining is a protocol that was designed from the beginning to enable people to build caches for deployments that want that type of thing. There's certainly deployments that don't need that. There's deployments that have completely their own caching network and everything. And it's not defining how caches talk to each other. It's just designing the protocol, the work here, such that caches can be used. You can build a cache type environment if you want to. I think that's what the proponents of this were largely thinking.
Thank you. Spencer.
Spencer Dawkins. I actually got up here to say something unrelated, but I do want to agree with Cullen there. I think that's the right attitude to have when we're talking about the charter. And the charter, it says basically signaling for location of basically everything is, you know, the working group would not define anything there. I wonder if there are any constraints about how any constraints on this protocol based on how people expect to be able to find sources and syncs and relays and stuff like that. If people have something clearly in mind, that would, you know, that's cool. But I just, you know, if we're trying to talk about interoperability, I'm a little concerned about that. Thank you.
Okay, Spencer, can you clarify what kinds of constraints you think might exist in people's minds?
So basically, as I read the charter, if you wanted to have an interoperable solution using this, there's no guidance from this charter about how we expect this protocol to be used at a minimum, and recognizing that, you know, anybody can do anything to locate anything in their special case. But, you know, do we have at least one thing in mind that people could use to locate the things that they need to locate? And the reason I mention that probably is because I would expect the next conversation we have to be about privacy concerns for senders and receivers. And, you know, it's like the best way for privacy concerns to be resolved is that senders and receivers can't find each other. So, you know, that's probably not the goal.
Okay, thanks. Victor.
I was going to comment on the media format thing. So as far as I remember, this was originally phrased as media containers instead of media formats. And then there were sufficiently many people upset with phrase containers that we replaced it with format. Regarding mandatory to implement, I personally find that in practice, the requirements to support a certain format or algorithm are in reality fairly toothless, because if the parties support different format as the protocol supports it, they will use a different format even if they don't support the MTI format. I think the message here is that the working group should define one format we expect people to use. Not necessarily that everyone will use it, or not necessarily that we expect people to even use it within 5 years after it's standardized.
Okay, thanks. Ecker.
So I think Victor's point first. I did not expect there to be, I'm trying to find this text now, but I didn't read that text as being mandatory to use format. I interpreted it as mandatory implement format, just like VP8 and 264 for WebRTC. And I do think those are useful. I think there's great interoperability, and I think we have, mandatory implement, exactly what the text I was expecting to see. So I think this is very useful, and I think it's a good idea. As for the encryption, thank you, Colin. That was very helpful. I guess 2 points about, so I'd be happy to work with you, make the charter say that. 2 points, I would be happier if it said it will always be end-to-end encrypted, but maybe we can argue about that outside the charter. Second, I'm still a little unclear about, and I obviously understand why you'd want to have some metadata in the clear for, the related to things. We talked about that in SRTP as well. But authenticating that is actually quite a tricky problem. So I think we may have to understand what that means a little better to be able to talk about that. So like in SRTP, right? The metadata is in the clear and it's authenticated end-to-end, but it can't be verified by people with other cryptographic keys. And maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not what you want, but to be clear what we're trying to say.
Thanks.
Okay, before we go on in the queue, I want to make a proposal here based on what we've heard so far. What the charter draft text currently says shall specify a mandatory to implement media format to ensure interoperability. I think we've had several people come up and say that the breadth of use cases makes that difficult to imagine actually working. And what I propose is that we adjust this to say, may specify a mandatory to implement media format for specific use cases to ensure interoperability for those use cases. And I think what that gives us is to say, if we see a use case where mandatory to implement is going to advance interoperability, the working group can then go forward and select one that's appropriate to that use case. But it is not trying to say any particular media format is going to cover the full gamut. Eric has said in chat that he would prefer the opposite, an MTI, which can be overridden in specific use cases. I think those are functionally the same. So if you want to write a PR that says it that way and put it against the charter, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Bernard.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Ecker's earlier concerns about the words end-to-end encryption. I think media encryption might make more sense, because I don't think you're trying to say that you're going to encrypt all the way from the ingester to the endpoint. That you would preclude transcoding. So I think what you're really trying to do is encrypt the media, and depending on the scenario, the ends may differ. So.
Okay, thanks. Mo.
Mo Zanatti, Cisco. If on the mandatory formats, if we are actually going to rehash the codec wars as as part of this work, let's get an IETF scheduled in Honolulu in the next year or two, because that seems to be the only way to resolve it. I'll have to get Ted to do one of his chants again to get everybody calm and mellow. But on the mandatory formats, I think it's important for people to realize that trying to make an exception for some use cases or having text which says this is mandatory only in this use case. I don't think anything in the protocol will actually ever be able to distinguish the use cases. I'm not imagining any protocol bits or semantics that would actually tell someone this is live streaming or this is interactive or this is VOD. So I'm kind of at a loss of how a publisher or subscriber would even know that this is going to be mandatory in this context or not. So while I think it's well intentioned to limit the mandatory formats to some use case, I don't think it's practically feasible to do that. And I think having a fallback that everybody always implements is becoming possibly less and less relevant over time, especially if you try to use a fallback like WebRTC did, that's most likely to be ancient by the time that this protocol sees widespread adoption. So if we had VP8 and H.264 in there, I'd be very sad as those mandatory to implement formats. So I don't think we should copy prior charters on that. Softening the language to just say may choose a mandatory format, I think may get us further down the road. But I would not add the text that Ted suggested about specific use cases because I don't think that's going to be feasible to implement. And then one point on the security is I agree with Ecker that reading the charter now with fresh eyes, it's very confusing and doesn't really convey what people that were working on this for a while have already had in the back of their heads that Colin suggested. So really, everything that is done by QUIC, we should explicitly say it in the charter that media will be encrypted per QUIC, but there will optionally also be an end-to-end encryption, and the protocol is not doing that. I think it's clear to specify that we are not specifying any of the protocol, not just the keying, but the actual use of those keys to encrypt media. Mock is not involved in any of that. But what is important is to identify, the protocol needs to be able to identify what is end-to-end encrypted and what the context is for that. How do you know, where do you get the DRM keys or end-to-end keys for that? I think that's important to specify. That's really what the protocol is going to do, is identify that some things are end-to-end encrypted and what the context is for that encryption. And that there is a separate context for transport metadata that the relays will have access to. So I think those are the important things to get out in the charter.
Thank you. Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra here. I just wanted to respond back to what Cullen was saying earlier on the use cases. So I don't think there's any qualms about use cases, and Charter is the right place to have all those, to be able to call out that MOQ mock will support these use cases. I think the question is that each of the use cases have to be looked differently. For example, that for live streaming, really caching is not really something that you would do, but maybe for VOD that would make sense to do that. The common denominator, of course, is that each of these applications will benefit with the low latency. So low latency applies universally, but there are other parameters. For example, caching will not apply to live streaming. So I think that really the point is that these are all valid use cases that should be addressed, and this is the right forum to do that. It's just a question of how do you prioritize of those use cases that you would want to work on in a way that one is not stepping over the other in terms of conflicting with what you need to do with the live streaming versus video streaming case, etc. So that was the point. Thank you.
Thanks. Luke.
Hi, it's Luke from Twitch again. So with mandatory formats, one of the things that comes up on the distribution side is caching. If we have 1,000 people watching a stream, we want them to all watch the same format. We don't want to have this case where we have 2 people have this legacy format that the initial draft specified. To not invoke flame wars, you could imagine if the draft said you must support GIF. But in the future, we're all using PNGs. You don't want one person using an old client to request a GIF and force a new encoding and spin up a new encoder and then force you to have a new cache. So at least for the broadcasting side, you can make a case for mandatory formats. You must support this codec. But at least on the distribution side, we want just one. It's too expensive to support multiple ones in a lot of cases. And we don't want to leave it up to the viewer to decide if they want to make it expensive for us. So The mandatory for some use cases, I think, is just toothless. Like, there's no point saying that. If you can just opt out of it by saying I'm not that use case. So I would just leave it in the air. Like, we have codecs. Unfortunately, people aren't going to come to a consensus anytime soon. So we should not try to force that.
Okay, thanks. Stefan.
So again, on the same topic, use case does not necessarily only have a technical dimension. So for example, broadcast distribution in China, where my employer sits, is when it comes to codec selection fundamentally different from broadcast distribution in the US, as an example, right? So trying to mandate a codec that folks over, say, in China are supposed to implement if they want to comply with our technology as specified here is a lost case. That's simple, right? Don't do it. Just don't do it. It's too difficult for this organization.
Okay, thanks. Philip. Sorry, we got some stale Q entries here.
Yeah, a bit more, Phil Hambeck, a bit more charter bashing. It's saying the working group will define. Is a will a may or a shall? So where it comes to media will be encrypted. So what I'd like to do there is media shall be encrypted. Metadata may be encrypted. Media may be end-to-end encrypted for certain use cases. In that, what I'm wanting is to make sure that I'm going to be able to encrypt my metadata between the endpoints that make sense for me and not have a second working group have to spin up like happened with WebRTC. So I want that's why I want to have that in the charter. I mean, yeah, we don't need to call it ends to ends or whatever. And I think that's, there's some wordsmithing that can go into the rest of the thing because I don't think you need the however outside the scope of the working group, as it's a bit chatty.
Thank you. I would encourage you to open a PR, see if you have specific suggestions, and that kind of goes for a lot of folks. I think maybe have some things, but yeah, feel free to jump in and contribute specific language where we can have a discussion. Next up, Spencer.
Spencer Dawkins, and I'm counting on Cullen to tell me if I'm saying something. So we've had discussion a bit on the mailing list, I think, most recently with about metadata not being monolithic, that some metadata is, as we've talked about it, is helpful for relays and things like that to figure out how to best forward packets and things like that. And other metadata is not that. So I don't know, I don't know that we've converged enough in discussions to be able to explain that in proposed charter text. But I think that's important for us to keep in mind when we're having a discussion, is that some of the metadata is going to be different from other metadata, and for us to be able to figure out a way to describe that difference in a way, in a meaningful way, because I think that is something that's important to keep in mind. So my second question is actually just making sure I understand. So you all want to see proposals for change text as PRs in the repo for the charter?
I guess if someone had specific changes, or particularly grammar or things like it reads wordy, that's probably easier for that person to open a PR. If it's maybe starting with an issue, and since not everyone's following the repo, for also copying the list maybe not be a bad idea.
So, and I would observe that the mock mailing list does get the weekly summaries from the repo. So for people to keep an eye on that. I'm not telling you that we've talked about things that were, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ted.
I was just going to say one of the reasons I was asking for it just now was I may be able to then show the PR to the group by sharing my screen a little bit later. But I think we haven't quite got to that part in the discussion yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, anything that will help me not submit some random piece of text that you guys have to merge in at some level. I would like to help you all be co-chairs. So the other thing is, if you all wanted to give guidance that if you're changing text, saying, say it this way, that's a reasonable candidate for a PR. But if you're saying we should be doing something different, and I would say like the my earlier suggestion about using the definition of live media from a individual draft, that might be more useful to have that discussion on the mailing list so that it can converge and the people do not have to try and figure out what to do with the competing PRs.
I just want to.
Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
I just wanted to respond to one thing Spencer said at the beginning, which was about metadata, and that there was some attempt in the charter to at least clarify the kinds of metadata that would be useful for transport relays and whatnot. But I think I heard you say you wanted more description or distinguishing the kinds of metadata that wouldn't be available, or that would be something for the working group to hash out.
This is Spencer again, so conveniently still in queue. The thing I was trying to say was and maybe the answer is that the charter recognizes that metadata is not monolithic, and that a working group responsibility will be to figure out what kind, how to treat different kinds of metadata for different reasons. I would be happy with that. Other people can do the right thing also.
Thank you for clarifying. Ted, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so Alan and I were kind of going in a side channel to talk a little bit about how we're going to handle the mandatory to implement media format discussion. And it occurred to us that it might be good to get a sense of the room. Obviously, that we've had some good comments at the mic, but what we're going to do is use the show of hand tool. The question that will be in the show of hand tool is the charter should specify a mandatory to implement media format either on a use case specific basis or generally. Raising your hand would be a yes to this, and choosing not to raise your hand in the tool would be a no. The session is starting now.
Yeah, Ted, I don't know if you can extend the amount of time here, but it sounds like some folks in the room lost the connection, and mine's been very unstable as well. So,
I don't think it will. I don't think it will end until I end it manually, at least at the moment.
Okay. Can I get an actual show of hands for people who cannot get to the show of hands tool? Okay, it looks like about 5 or 6 folks.
For what?
You need to ask the opposite of that too, though. The people who can't get to the do not raise hands tool need to not raise their hands by raising their hand.
Okay, we don't seem to be getting a lot more. So through the tool, what I see is do not raise hand 63, raise hand 20. That's clearly not consensus in either direction, but it is definitely trending toward concern toward specifying a mandatory to implement media format. So I think what we probably need to do here is to think if there's something else that reaches us for that interoperability, that's the desired goal of that mandatory to implement format, but perhaps doesn't use that particular method. So I think we'll take that as something that would be continued work on crafting the charter. Let's go back to the queue. Sorry, go ahead.
Colin Jason, Ted, I was probably just confused, but I may not be the only person in the room. You were hard to, your mic's really over loud, and I actually took your question to be about mandatory to implement codecs, not formats when you ran that poll, but you know, my mistake. Anyway, I may not have been the only one confused. It does seem like on the mandatory and codecs, people were sort of, it seemed to me that many people were speaking towards don't bother with them, or if you do bother with them, they won't mean anything anyway. So I'm fine with that type of charter change. I don't think things. I wanted to come back to the metadata for a minute, because I think that that's the other one. And my strong belief is the only thing that should go in this not encrypted stuff is stuff that the protocol mandatorily won't work with if you encrypted it, right? There should be nothing that you could encrypt that you don't encrypt for the end-to-end encryption type stuff. So we're talking about the, you know, to put this in IP terms, it's be like, you can't encrypt the destination IP address. Like the network can't function if you do that, right? And this is the same thing. What is the absolute stuff that the caches have to be able to see, or the middle servers need to be able to, the server needs to be able to see, so that it can make the right decisions about what to forward next, what media to flow, congestion control, those types of things. There should be nothing else. I thought we had tried to make that clear in the charter. I regret using the word meta. You know, I wish we hadn't used metadata there, but I think that we need to try and phrase it in that type of form. That, you know, there'll be some data that when you're using it in encryption, there'll be some data that's only authenticated, and that authenticated data will only include stuff that's absolutely necessary for the functioning of the protocol. And I think that that would resolve a bunch of PHP's concerns and is better aligned to what many people in the working group thought it meant in the first place. And it's not just some vague envelope where all kinds of like privacy creepy stuff can be set. Thanks.
Thank you. Ecker?
Yeah, I think that'd be a fine suggestion from Colin, though I suspect we'll find this thing isn't extensible, and then all kinds of creepy privacy stuff can be sent in it. So Richard Barnes and I independently produced 2 PRs that attempt to like encode this discussion about encryption. I think either would be fine. So please take a look. Those are 59 and 60, probably 60, which is his, a little stronger. I'm still, I think, a little confused about the text about. I'm sorry. Can we have the thing about the authentication of clients for access? I think maybe the next slide. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Here we go. So so I think this first sentence, I tried to I'm trying to rewrite about, because I think it just means a way to demonstrate that the relay, you should get the media, or maybe a way to demonstrate the relay that you should be enabled to ingest media. So that seems easy, and I can fix that, but I don't understand what the stuff after the comma means. And so maybe someone could tell me what the stuff after the comma means, and then we could write the text so it says that.
Okay, thanks. Suhas.
I had notes on the transport metadata, on the metadata, which is very similar to what Cullen said. I kind of just want to echo that, and if you can make it clear, that is more of a metadata for things in the middle that do not want to access media or don't need to access media but want to work on it to make the decisions to forward or drop, react to congestion control. We need to help. Because that's the only way we can make these relays to be really cacheable and also performant and scalable as well. And on the thing about relay discovery, I personally feel that kind of should be outside the scope of this working group. Maybe an architecture document could specify some of the like informal ways to do that, but the working group itself should not take to define mechanisms to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Alyssa.
Alyssa Cooper. I was just reflecting a little bit about the relationship between the WebRTC charter and what happened in WebRTC with the codec situation to try to think about this in that frame. And, you know, we ended up with different requirements for different kinds of endpoints, WebRTC browser, WebRTC non-browser, and WebRTC compatible something or other endpoint. And I was just wondering if thinking about it from the client perspective might cut through this a little bit, because it sounded like when Luke was talking, it's really about this difference between a situation where you want the node serving the media to be able to dictate what the format should be, and it's acceptable to have a loss of interoperability, whereas other situations where it's very important to be able to have that authority live with the clients, that you'll cut out a lot of opportunity for independent clients to be part of the ecosystem if there isn't a baseline specified. And so maybe that's a way to, I find the concept of doing it on a use case by use case basis a little bit unsatisfactory, but I still do think that you need to have common baselines in some of these cases. So maybe that's a way to cut through it. But then I was also thinking that had we tried to specify these categories of clients in the WebRTC case ahead of time, that never would have happened because it took like many years to come to that sort of compromise. So I feel like you need something in the charter that's generic enough to capture this, but doesn't overly specify all the different subsets with different requirements.
Thanks. Just a note, we're going to cut the queue soon. So if you have something you want to say, please get yourself in the queue.
Mozanetti, I think Alyssa makes a good point about the different device types rather than use cases. And what may not be clear in the charter is there's clearly two different device types. There's subscribers and publishers. That's one type of device. And there's, or entity, let's not say device. And then there's servers, relays, and caches, which for the most part should not know or care what the media formats are if we do our job right. It's just the transport protocol. It's not actually going to operate on any of the media. So it shouldn't require the end-to-end keys. It shouldn't require knowledge of the formats and all of that. So I think it may be useful to, if there's going to be something mandatory to implement in codec formats, it should only impact the subscribers and publishers and not anything else in the chain. And on the encryption, I think there was a suggestion that I put on the mailing list about explicitly naming the word transport metadata as what the protocol operates on and can see and access. And we may not, well, probably won't be able to describe it in detail in the charter. I think it's going to be something for future work in the actual documents that come out. But I think it may be useful to have something in the charter to nail the concept of transport metadata that is accessible to the relays. I think right now it just says a method of of accessing some data, such as, and it gives examples. I think just having a word for it, transport metadata, and then all other data besides that, be it content or metadata, can be optionally end-to-end encrypted. But we still need to indicate where that's taking place. The protocol needs to specify where that end-to-end encryption is taking place, and not just have it publishers and subscribers know this is DRM content and this is not DRM content. And then I think we also need to have some people that liaise with the MPEG forums about common encryption, because there's been a lot of work done among publishers and device makers to not have to have multiple formats, and MPEG common encryption may be useful for that. And that may be something that we can leverage in this work too.
Okay, thanks. Victor.
Victor Vasiliev, Google. Two things. First, to the point that if we do our job right, the transport should not be aware about format. I am not entirely sure that is the case, because part of the goals of MOC is to be able to intelligently choose when to drop, give us selected chunks of media. So that pretty much might imply that we need to have a more advanced knowledge of what's actually in the media than being a mere transport. The second point I wanted to make is regarding simple method of authentication. That's never a good wording, because whenever I think of something simple methods of authentication, I think of something like stun. It is, oh, yes, encrypted with MD5. We might want to just leave this out of the charter and leave it as an extension.
Okay, thanks. Eric.
On the topic of caching, as well as whether intermediates need to be able to view content, I think one thing that's really worth keeping in mind is that there's a live and on demand are not the only things. That a lot of for many of the use cases, kind of the semi-live and DVR style use cases where people can go back and be watching live slightly delayed or rewind a little bit, play very heavily into this. So a lot of these systems end up being ones where there's a very blurry line between live, semi-live, DVR, and on demand, and how that fits into caching and how that fits into middle boxes. It's something that we'll need to figure out early on if we want to be able to handle those use cases, or versus purely being a transport.
Okay, thanks. I think Ted's gonna go through some PRs.
Okay, so thanks everybody. There were a lot of good suggestions for updates to the charter during the course of today's discussion. It's good to see so much energy in the queue, whether it's remote or in the room. There were a couple filed here, and I believe two of them kind of overlap. I'm going to show 60 rather than 59 based on some comments in the chat. But I'm just going to go through these very quickly. If you have like very, very serious heartburn, please add yourself to the queue to let us know what that is. But just to let you know what the proposals discussed were. So this was just making this more general to add or other mechanism. This one, as I believe we discussed, was to remove push from around protocol, and I'm not even going to click through that since it's the deletion of a single word. This one, as we discussed, was to add MOPS to the working group coordination list. Again, that's a very quick one. And this is the more complex one. That updates the encryption discussion. I'll give folks a minute to read that. Okay, is there anybody with serious heartburn who needs to join the queue to tell us why these PRs should not be accepted?
I don't see anybody in the queue here or online.
So Betchett said that the left side of the room can't see it. Okay, so, and Eric wants me to click the Files Changed tab so all the changes roll together. Let's see here. I think I have to move out of that. So that would be the first change. Okay, so I think what that is telling us is that at the end of this meeting, we'll be accepting those PRs, and we'll now go on to ask some of the questions that are the BOF questions. So I'm going to stop the screen share now, but as you'll see in the chat, there is a link to the polls and a related set of things. Sorry, looks like
yeah, Colin jumped up and just got in the queue.
Ted, there was one more PR that came in from Ecker that looks quite good to me while you were doing that. So maybe we could just do that one as well.
Okay, let me look for that. Thanks to people who want to take a quick look at this. And again, the same applies. If you see a need to leap into the queue to tell us why this is wrong, please do so. Okay, I don't see anybody leaping into the queue there either. Once again, these are, of course, all on the GitHub repo, and we can encourage people to file comments there if you don't have a chance to do the comments here in the room. Okay, we're now going to move on to the BOF questions. Give me a chance here to start the show of hands tool. Okay, apologies. I seem to have closed the window where I had all of these locked up, so it'll take me just a second. Talk amongst yourselves.
So in case anyone missed it, the poll is up.
Okay, I've now discovered that you cannot actually unmute yourself once you've started a poll. Thank you to whoever it was that actually said the poll is up now. So Spencer, as is clear in one of the later ones, when we talk about the problem statement, we mean after the discussion in the room. That's also clear when we'll start talking about the charter. So give us a second for the next BOF question.
Okay, the poll appears to be up.
Okay, I haven't seen any additional entries in, oh, one just came in, two just came in. We'll give it another 30 seconds then.
We can also just hum in the room if we like humming. Just sort of a hmm. Come on, you miss the hums. You know you do.
Okay, I think it's probably okay to end the session now, so I'm going to do so. Oh, no, still a couple slinking in. All right, so that was 62 folks raised their hand that they were willing to review documents or comment on the mailing list if a working group should be formed. 9 people deliberately did not raise their hand, indicating they would not be willing. And I'll point out that there are 152 people in the aggregate here. So there's definitely quite a few people who are choosing not to answer. And once again, I have lost the... Okay, this next one is starting now. Okay, we seem to have reached the end of folks actively participating in the poll, so I'll end this session. The final question really isn't a show of hands style question. It's for anyone who does not think a working group should be formed. Do you wish to address the BOF addressing your concerns? And I did notice that there was one person who apparently raised and then lowered and raised and then lowered and raised and then lowered their hand a number of times. So if you feel wishy-washy about it and wish to address the BOF with your concerns, you're also welcome to join the queue now. Okay,
I'm not seeing anybody. I'm not seeing anyone leap up to the mic queue, and no one is in the queue online.
It is traditional at this moment then for us to turn it over to our area director to ask if there are any other questions the area director would like asked or any comments the area director would like to make.
I just walked all the way to the mic to say nope. Not yet. No, I think I got what I need for now. Thanks.
Okay, we did say that if time allowed, we would offer to host a technical presentation or two. Only one person sent in such a technical presentation, which was Suhas. So the well-named "If Time Permits Quick R" is now the draft.
I believe it is pronounced quick R.
Thank you for that correction. Suhas, would you like to talk about quick R?
Yes, I would like to talk about quicker. Okay, thank you, Ted and Alan, for driving the BOF. I'll try to give a quick overview of what quicker is. It's a media delivery protocol or quick. I'll start by setting up some context on why we started thinking about quicker and what use cases.
Suhas,
Yes.
Can you
Alan?
speak louder and maybe a little, ironically for me, slower?
Okay, if it comes from Eckers, I'll try to slow. Okay, so I try to talk about quicker.
Colin Jenny's here. I wonder maybe if we should just move this to an offline meeting or some other time or so. Suhas, the problem is we're just having a really hard time understanding you in the room. So I don't know how important this is right now.
Unless, Colin, you want to speak to the slides since you're here?
No, I want to go for lunch.
Okay. Suhas, is that okay since we're having a hard time hearing you? Or
I think
would you like to try to soldier through?
I think that's a fine suggestion. We can do an offline meeting and talk about more technical details.
Okay.
Okay, if that's going to be the case, I think probably one of the things that Alan and I will chat with the area directors that if they do in fact form a working group based on today's BOF, that we'll probably want to schedule a pretty early interim meeting before 115, so we can start the technical discussions. Since this meeting was very firmly focused on charter scope and charter language, there really weren't a whole lot of technical discussions which might have taken place here. Hopefully those of you in Philadelphia are having wonderful hallway conversations to do that, but that we might want to schedule some sort of interim meeting online or in person to try and get those technical discussions kicked off. Again, pending the decision of the ISG and any final charter changes. Does that make sense to folks? Looks like Spencer is in queue.
Spencer Dawkins. Ted, if I could make what I hope is a friendly amendment. I can't think of a good reason for BOFs to not be able to request an interim meeting to work on charter text and things like that. I'm not saying that that would be a good plan, but if the chairs thought that that would be a good plan, you might want to explore with the area directors whether that would be something that you could do as well. I'd, you know, November's a long time away. And for us to be able to have higher bit rate exchange between now and then, if getting chartered is problematic, that might be useful as well.
Yep, if it turns out that the community needs to discuss charter changes that the ISG or the broader community requires, we can definitely do that as well. But I was also thinking that the technical discussions would be a great topic of conversation for a get-together, online or in person, sometime between now and 115, if that made sense. So if there's no comments on that, we can let people go off to lunch.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you on the list.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, area directors, and also thank you, note takers. How's it going? I mean, there were more people who wanted a working group than thought the problem was clear and solvable. Let's make one anyway. Yeah.